Hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Land Effects live webinar today. We got a special treat for y'all. We have Jeremiah Farmer, the CEO, talking all about e-bikes today. My name is Jake, and I will be moderating. I want to do a couple house cleaning items really quick before we get started. Those attending get the cool opportunity to ask questions, chat amongst your fellow people here. So please, please, please get those questions ready. You have a Q&A button that you can expand and type in those questions, and where we see fit, we will try and get those answered the best that we can. If you decide to use that chat window, I please ask that you refrain from asking questions in there so that we can keep them all in the Q&A, but feel free to make comments and chat amongst yourselves there. It's always fun to see you guys banter about your guys' experience with e-bike or design with said items. This is also being recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch and refer back to all this stuff. So with that being said, I'm going to pass this over to Jeremiah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. Good morning, everybody. This is me. Like Jake said, I might be the boss around here, but today I'm speaking as an e-bike enthusiast. Of late, have been exploring a bunch of e-bikes and have learned quite a lot and been collecting articles for quite some time and all came together for this little presentation. What we're going to talk about today, well, first, what is an e-bike? I think it's important to talk about kind of the components and some of the models of e-bikes to kind of appreciate what's happening in the industry. And what's kind of how it's consolidating, some e-bike success stories, some not so success stories, and what we can do. This is definitely very specific for a landscape architect. This is e-bikes, from a landscape architect's perspective. So let's get going, shall we? What is an e-bike? It is the bicycle. It's a wheeled mobility device that has pedals, but it does have a battery and an electric motor. And so that offers what's called pedal assist. The motor can either directly turn the pedals, or it can even be in the rear hub and directly turn the rear wheel. And it can even optionally have a throttle so that either it's turning the pedals with you, or you're just jamming your thumb forward and rock it along like a little electric scooter. But the result is a bicycle in form and function that can be ridden much easier over longer distances, over hills, with less effort, with less athleticism. You can show up at your destination not drenched in sweat like you just completed a stage in the Tour de France. The result is something that's a very viable method of transportation, absolutely rivaling automobiles. In fact, exceeding automobiles in several categories, much less expensive. It doesn't have the requirements of registration, insurance, licensing. You won't get stuck in traffic, and it's easier to park, and all of these things, much cheaper to operate. And so it's really causing this sort of revolution in personal mobility. As for the legal classifications, here in the States, we have class 1, 2, and 3. Notably, these are not at the federal level. The individual states have all individually adopted the same classification. There's still a handful of states that haven't. Where class 1 e-bike, that pedal assist can reach a top speed of 20 miles an hour. And then if the bike has a throttle, that makes it a class 2 e-bike, still limited to 20 miles an hour. It does still have to have pedals, though. And then a class 3 e-bike jumps up to 28 miles an hour top speed. If a class 3 bike does have a throttle, the throttle has to cut off at 20 miles an hour. And then this is drawn very much from the European Union standards. Their equivalent class 1 tops out at 25 kilometers an hour or 15.5 miles an hour. But their speed pedelec class is exactly the same as our class 3. Bikes for those classes are freely shipped and sold in both jurisdictions. Interestingly, in the EU, If a bike has a throttle, they see that as something totally different. They see that as not a bicycle at all. They see that as an electric moped. So it is regulated as such. It is allowed to reach a higher speed of 45 kilometers an hour, but it has to have a license plate. The driver has to be insured and licensed, and the bike is registered as such. So both are very concerned about the throttle. The whole reason for this classification is, very commonly you'll see that a certain, pedestrian path, no throttleable devices are allowed. So it's only allowing class one bikes on a path, very, very common. And in fact, we're seeing even more limits of that. New York City, you may have heard of this, recently voted well, not voted, I think just enacted to limit e-bike speeds at 15 miles an hour. In one regard, it's understandable. That's basically what many cities in Europe do. They only allow the 15.5 mile an hour inside the city limits, and the speed pedelec class is only allowed outside of the city. In New York City, being a large city, kind of understandable. But I must question, first of all, this is a delicate balance with what is made by manufacturers. So, are you proposing I guess, class zero at 15 miles an hour? How long is the industry allowed to catch up with this? What about the thousands and thousands of devices already out there? They're capped at 20 miles an hour. Are you really going to ticket people for going 20 in a 15? What is the purpose of this? Are we concerned about pedestrian injury and death? If so, have you heard about these 5,000-pound killing machines called automobiles? They are responsible for thousands of pedestrian injuries every year in New York City. These are the statistics from NYPD. I know you might go, well, that little brown bar at the bottom, that's a number of injuries from e-bikes and e-scooters. No, no, no. That's from anything other than a car. That includes gasoline motorcycles, which actually dominate that bottom category. The number of injuries from e-bikes and scooters is tiny. Thousands of pedestrians injured every year by cars, and the focus is on slowing down the e-bikes and scooters. We're going to come back to talk a little more about New York City, but for now I want to kind of get going. Let's talk about the components of an e-bike to appreciate what's happening in the industry. The basic form of a bicycle has been virtually unchanged for 150 years. That's a Wright Brothers original on the left. Gorgeous bike, right? I mean, you could ride that around today and it would basically pass as a bicycle today. How fun would that be, right? There's 5 Wright Brothers bikes left in the world. It's not just a gorgeous bike. But anyway, but that chain drive is the ubiquitous part of a bicycle. But with e-bikes, they are more and more transitioning to a carbon belt drive, as you can see on the right. And your basic parts, you need the motor. So does the motor go in the rear hub or does it go in the pedal housing? That a so-called mid-drive motor. I absolutely prefer a mid-drive motor. When the motor is in the rear hub, it can feel a little bit like an invisible monster pushing you as you're riding your bike. It's okay. It's a friendly invisible monster, but it's still, someone's pushing you is kind of what it feels like. Whereas when the motor is the mid-drive motor, it just feels like you're really strong that day. Whoa, I have been working out. Thank you. And so it's just a more natural experience. And so definitely the industry is sort of transitioning to putting the motor in the pedal housing. And then that leaves, your transmission is, if it's a chain drive, you're going to have your exposed sprockets and derailleur in the back. Or if it's a carbon belt drive, it's transitioning to like this, that sealed transmission inside the rear hub. But there's certainly variation. It's not a absolute switch to carbon belt drives, but just noting it is absolutely a trend towards something that's just simply more robust. But take this, for example. This is an entry-level bike made by Aventon here in the States. Very typical e-bike form. A very common form we're seeing with the dropped frame. You see the frame is enlarged for the battery. Still, of course, a traditional chain drive. To keep that price down. Just a really great entry level e-bike, really representative. But notably, look at these advanced features that they're including even on an entry level e-bike. GPS tracking. You already have the computer on there to handle the motor. Why not add a GPS chip with 4G connectivity? Suddenly you have GPS tracking. People, whenever I talk about e-bikes, people inevitably say, well, aren't you afraid it's going to get stolen? And I inevitably say, I actually kind of hope it does because I can't wait to see the look on their face because I'm just going to show the police my phone and there's the blue dot of where the bike is and they're going to go get it for me. You know, the the GPS tracking, it's effectively taking the whole fear of theft just completely off of the table, and almost making it where it's assumed that an e-bike would have GPS tracking. So definitely don't steal that. But then they even go one step further, prevent the theft itself with an integrated lock. Use your app, and then that rear motor just locks the rear wheel completely so the wheel won't even turn. So you don't have to fumble and get a chain and lock your bike and all of that. And we're even seeing this in the drive units. So for instance, Bosch, who makes by far the most drive units for e-bikes, their upper tier models have a connectivity option where it'll effectively brick the entire device, where the motor just will not operate until the paired cell phone itself unlocks it. And so we're just addressing these fundamental issues of security, and ease of use. And then on up to a kind of representative upper tier model. This is realistically the most you would ever spend on an e-bike. This is a top of the line with Specialized. This is the Vado 5.0. It is a absolutely fantastic bike. But very much, it looks like a bicycle that happens to be electric. But you can see, what do you get for this upper tier price? You have the mid motor, the carbon belt drive. That's a stepless automatic transmission in the rear. I actually really, really like those. And just makes it easy. I don't have to worry about shifting up and down. You just get on it and ride. You have the front suspension. That's a seat post suspension, so it's a very smooth ride. Everything about this, it's impervious to the elements. There's not the maintenance issues of a chain drive. Not a chance that you're going to whack that derailleur and throw the chain or anything. But also, notably here, this has a rear radar. Um, so that's really cool. It sees about 400 feet behind you and just alerts you when a car is coming up from behind. So it's just a helpful safety feature. So we're seeing these things of ease of maintenance, ease of use, comfort and ease, all consolidating around this personal mobility revolution that's happening. Another really interesting feature that's on right now, much higher end bikes, is anti-lock brakes. When you think about it, an e-bike is 50 pounds and rocketing along at 25 miles an hour. You need to be able to safely panic brake. And with a traditional bike brakes, you grab those brakes, it's going to nose over and drop you out on the pavement, whereas anti-lock braking will just stop the bike, safely. So, look for this to continue its sort of downward progression, exactly like it did with cars. When anti-lock brakes first came out in the 1970s and into the 80s, a few models of cars had them, then more and more. It took 40 years until it finally then even became the law, and every car has to have anti-lock brakes. And look for the same here. Anti-lock brakes only adds about $600 to the cost of a bike. So for, a higher end bike, that is certainly, in a class of going 25 plus miles an hour, look for it to almost even be required within, maybe it will be 40 years, but within time. But note also, this is Stromer. They're a Dutch company. This is their ST3. This is a long distance commuter. So this is a big, heavy bike to get that 150-kilometer range. But they have a pinion gearbox. So they put the gearbox inside the pedal housing. And so again, it's all about being sealed from the elements. Any amount of mud or snow or rain, it's just not going to worry this thing. And lest you have sticker shock, know there is a ST7 and an ST9 if you want to really be scared by how expensive they are. But realistically, you're looking in more the sort of mid-range price point. This is where the industry is really kind of consolidating. This is notable. This is Raleigh. They are the oldest bicycle company in the UK. They've been making bikes for 150 years, and this is their newest flagship model, the Raleigh 1. This is brand new and is exactly what I'm seeing as the trend of the industry. Look at this, the oldest, most prestigious bike company in the UK. You have this very custom frame that just is absolutely screams e-bike, has the lights built into it as part of the frame, carbon belt drive. They're even going with a single speed. With the power of the motor, you don't necessarily need gearing. And so just a nice little single speed bike. You've got the wider tires, the 2.5-inch tires are kind of, becoming the norm on e-bikes. You get a little more protection from bumps and such in the road. Again, because that motor has that additional power, you get these sort of creature comforts. But look at the GPS theft just being built in. But what I most noticed about the Raleigh 1, what just really jumped out to me, is the clear lineage from the VanMoof S3. When VanMoof in 2020 announced they were setting out to reinvent what an electric bike is, I was following their saga just intimately. When they finally announced shipping of the S3 to the United States, I ordered mine that day. um, but they wanted to reinvent what an e-bike is. At the time, e-bikes looked like a bicycle with a battery strapped to it. This is a custom frame. The battery is integrated into the frame. The lights are integrated into the frame. It has GPS anti-theft. It has the smart kick lock in the rear hub, an automatic 4-speed shifter. So everything about it was trying to appeal to a broader segment of society, not just bicycle geeks. You could just get on it and ride, and much like a vehicle, a car experience, can you bring that to an e-bike? And look at, here we are 5 years later, and what was groundbreaking and revolutionary and even odd looking to people 5 years ago, now the oldest and most prestigious bike company in the UK is all but copying that design. And this revolution is also meaning that bikes are about more than just moving one person. You can move additional passengers, cargo. This is a representative spread of the availability of cargo e-bikes available. Your entry-level bike, that electric model on the left, Rad Power also has a very similar one, same price point. That's what you can get. Something you can load up 3 kids on that and take them to school. And I'm seeing more and more parents do this. Um, it is this very booming trend. Skip the traffic. Don't worry about that giant drop-off lane at the school. But that then brings us to our first infrastructure challenge. Every school design that I've seen of late has a huge drop-off lane for cars. Where's the drop-off lane for e-bikes? It's absolutely something that we need to start thinking about. But back to this spread of models, of course, if you can afford it, you can want that fine German engineering of the Reisenmüller cargo bike on the right. That's where you get the carbon belt drive, rear suspension, a finely engineered frame that's going to be very stable at any speed and any amount of cargo weight. But I'm certainly not going to justify that expense. Your sweet spot is going to be in the middle. There's really good models in that $3,000 to $5,000 range. And the result is, there's just more and more segments of society that bikes and bike models, or especially e-bikes, are applying to. Doctors are recommending them for elderly people. It's a great way to get exercise. It absolutely is. You just set the pedal assist for your athletic ability and you noodle around. It's fantastic. We are in the midst of a absolute revolution of personal mobility. Perhaps only comparable to when horses were introduced to North America. It's absolutely upending industry after industry. They're switching over to e-bikes. Hunting. That's a hunter at the bottom. They're quiet, they're easy to transport around. It's a fantastic mobility device. In fact, even the Amish are riding e-bikes. I know what you're going to say. Hey, wait, I thought the Amish didn't have electricity. You know what? They're using solar panels to charge their e-bikes. This speaks to the appeal of this simple, amazing technology across every segment of society. Um, but look at how this is highlighting our infrastructure challenges. The guy on the left there, I guarantee you that grocery store parking lot does not have a good place for him to park that bike with a trailer. The kid on the right on the little e-scooter, what is that, a 45-mile-an-hour zone? There's not even a bike lane painted there, let alone a curb or separated bike lane. Uh, we have so many infrastructure challenges in front of us. And can we please state the insane thing here? The Amish are adopting the height of technology faster than society at large is. How insane is that? This has never happened. The Amish, they don't adopt the height of technology while society is still the lumbering one. But yet here we are clinging to these metal monsters that burn dinosaur juice. And here's the Amish quietly zipping by on the transportation of the future. How insane is that? Manufacturers are also changing how we even buy e-bikes. If you ever go to Santa Cruz, California, you can visit the only Gazelle Experience Center in the entire world. They're a Dutch e-bike company. I cannot speak highly enough of them. Fantastic bikes. I've been there. The staff is wonderful. They're very knowledgeable. They have all their makes and models. You can test ride them and decide what you want. And what they do is they just refer you to your local bike shop of choice. They have two large distribution centers in the United States, and then they just ship to your local bike shop where you complete the transaction and have your new e-bike. It's a fantastic way to have that e-bike experience because bike shops are notorious and they're small. They don't have every make and model and size and color. Um, but these experience centers, because they're not directly selling it, they can pop them up anywhere, very similar to how Tesla has done in states that require a dealer. So they set up an experience center, there's less regulation, and it's much easier. So this was all just throwing fuel on the fire of this revolution of e-bikes. So let's check the numbers. You know, we're halfway through the year here. You may have heard of these electric vehicles, right? And we've got electric vehicle tax credits or mandates, and we have all the charging infrastructure and EV lanes that we've been doing. For where are we at? 1.2 million EVs is how many will be sold this year. Meanwhile, e-bikes outsell them 5 to 1. Are we putting 5 times the effort and the money into e-bike infrastructure that we are into EV infrastructure? Because we should be. That's where the numbers are. These are not your stereotypical bicycle enthusiasts with their lycra pants. This is a mom of three on a bike. This is a absolute revolution of personal mobility. And if we have got to get on board with it. One challenge that is being addressed is that of charging. So this is Tiller. This is a company in the Netherlands, and they're trying to solve the charging problem. They've invented this inductive charging mat. And so that black kickstand, that just replaces the kickstand on your bike. It's actually compatible with any model e-bike. It's a really neat little concept. Just folds back, you ride away, and you come down, you fold down your kickstand, drop it on the mat, and it instantly starts charging your bike. So this is empowering to broader segments of society. Your lower cost e-bike with a smaller range can now do more if there's more charging and easier charging at your destination. It's a really neat concept, but it's not addressing any security issues. So I'm a little more impressed with this Dero Bike Keep Smart Bike Station. They are going to be at the ASLA Expo. Do please check them out. I really love this product. Everything about this to me solves problems with e-bikes. E-bikes are larger, they're heavier, and they're more valuable than a regular bike. They need a better bike locking station, and this solves it. I love the simple efficacy of that locking bar, the robustness of it. Every e-bike owner cannot possibly be expected to carry with them a chain so robust that it can defeat any hoodlum with an angle grinder, right? I mean, that's insane. So this is a really great little piece of infrastructure for bike parking. But they go one step further. It has an option for power to charge the e-bike. But the problem is there's no standard in the industry. So all it means is there's a little access panel and you open it up and then there's a 110-volt outlet down there. So you would have to bring a charging brick with you to charge your bike. So I can't imagine they're selling a lot of those because really what we're waiting for is standardization with charging. Well, that has already happened. Here's Ampler. They're a company based in Estonia. Their entire line of e-bikes all charge via USB-C. Look for USB-C to take over the e-bike industry in no more than a handful of years. It's so obviously the way to go. Replace those proprietary plugs, open up all of those products like that Bike Keep station to just simply need a USB-C port. So then all you need is a USB-C cable with you, or maybe there even would be one inside there. Um, Absolutely amazing. And again, we see again this yet another example, this mid-range price, GPS tracking built into it, the lights already on there. You're very kind of just typical kind of an e-bike. So let's transition to talk a little more about infrastructure. Here's a photo from the Adirondack Rail Trail. This is in upstate New York. 34 miles is how long it will eventually be, and about a third of it has opened to the public now. And in 6 months, they've seen about 100,000 trips on it. Surprising literally nobody. Anyone who has advocated for rail trails knows how popular they are. I feel rail trails are one of the greatest things our country has to offer. You have this pristine corridor of what was a railroad line. Um, and so it's been untouched by encroachment and development. So you get these fantastic views of the natural, countryside, gentle grade, so it's ideal for walking or riding a bike. And over a distance like 34 miles, that is screaming for an e-bike. Whole industries need to pop up, little bodegas and coffee shops and hotels and things, all this economic development. And it's just so universally appreciated. It's just such an obvious thing. It's unfortunate that there are rail trails that are just, mired in the complexity. I've attended multiple ASLA conferences where there was a talk on rail trails. So I appreciate the complexity and the difficulty with it. It's just unfortunate. Here is the project in Santa Cruz, California. That's a 28-mile abandoned railroad line that's over 150 years old. And the idea has been, well, why don't we make that a rail trail? And this project has just been stalled of late. The big problem of late is you see this adjacent Highway 1. Well, that gets a lot of traffic at rush hour. And so the hope by some people has been, hey, maybe we should put commuter rail on this 150-year-old rail line that hasn't even seen a single train on it in over 30 years. Even though the rail line, runs down here to the boardwalk, it would be completely useless to be dropped off here. A transportation hub should be more in the middle area here, would make more sense. But, there's this fantasy that they can breathe some life into these ancient tracks with a commuter rail, when meanwhile, if you've been there, this is some of the most beautiful views you'll ever see in your life. This is where the redwood forest meets the Pacific Ocean. It is staggeringly beautiful with pleasant climate. It obviously should be a rail trail. The concept of commuter rail, the latest estimate is it's going to be $4.5 billion to try to breathe life into these ancient tracks. And even that is only going to be 6 trains a day. It's barely even going to put a dent in the commuter traffic, as opposed to just a rail trail. How many hundreds of thousands of miles of road have we put in as a society? I think we know how to do that. But no, we have to entertain the notion of what do we do to have this secure path adjacent to a live train network. I mean, everything about that is just insane to even suggest. On the right here, yes, just a normal bike pedestrian path. That makes sense. Do that. Nope, this is what they're considering. They have to put the security fencing all along it and these precarious pedestrian crossings. And, I see this and I just know it'll never happen. There's no way that an operator of commuter rail would allow an insecure pedestrian crossing like that over live tracks. They're going to demand a pedestrian overpass. And every one of those, and what, another $30 million? It's just going to doom the whole project, make it take longer, cost more money. Who knows? It's so unfortunate. Meanwhile, in the 20 plus years we've been fighting for this project, in 5 years, Caltrans went from idea to getting $400 million to widening that Highway 1. Did they put in room for a light rail? Did they put in a pedestrian path? Did they have to justify why they were widening the highway and have public engagement? No, none of the above, none of the above, none of the above. They just get $400 million instantly and do it. Meanwhile, the people who are proposing something as simple as this rail trail are just continue to fight this uphill battle. I don't know the way to solve the problem, but here's something I'll throw out there. I see a synergy of ADA accessibility and bicycle paths. And let me explain what I mean by that. I see these renderings and mock-ups of bike paths. I never see someone in a wheelchair, and I recommend it for multiple reasons. If you've ever been in a wheelchair or hung out with anyone in a wheelchair, you know what a crapshoot it is going anywhere. Is this going to be accessible? Is this going to be easy to get in and out of? It's annoying. It's beyond annoying and frustrating. But a bicycle path, by definition, is accessible. I have a friend in Santa Cruz in a wheelchair. He is dying for that rail trail to get done because it's something you can do in a wheelchair. So put an image of someone in a wheelchair in these renderings. If that pulls at the heartstrings of that last commissioner to get the final vote and approve the project, well, hallelujah, right? But more specifically, if we can chain our hopes to that of with ADA, we can embrace progress via lawsuit. And let me explain what I mean by that. Everyone loves to decry ADA lawsuits as somehow being frivolous or whatnot. But, I'm sorry, it's been the law for 30 years. If you haven't put away $10 a week to afford that ramp in front of your business, you deserve to get sued. I'm sorry, but it moves us forward. But in that same spirit, look at what's happening in Los Angeles. In 2015, the Los Angeles Master Plan had a bold vision of a lot of protected bike paths. And as of late, they've only put in 8.4% of them. I mean, they've all but ignored their own master plan. So in 2024, Measure HLA voter initiative went on the ballot and passed. And this is now law. It states that whenever the city improves any segment of road, they have to address the bicycle lanes, the bus lanes, the pedestrian crossings, all the other users of this public space. Roads are not subsidized thoroughfares for people who are so wealthy as to afford a car. They are public spaces and they need to be as such. And that is what this measure says. And now it's law. And now someone is suing Los Angeles to make it happen. And I wish them all the luck in the world. Los Angeles, one of the highest priced real estate markets in the entire world, if they don't have the money to do some basic infrastructure like a protected bike lane, then what are we even doing? Like, obviously, it's just a priority issue. And if a lawsuit shakes up the priorities, then go for it. Here is a case study. It's a little close to home, literally. This is San Luis Obispo. See the South Hills? My house is right there, right there. And anyway, so this is the Bob Jones Trail, and it's this black paved path right here. It runs from the parking lot to Avila Beach. Really beautiful little ride through the golf course. Really just really fun. And then meanwhile, there's this other pedestrian bike path up here. Full disclosure, most of this is an easement through the sewage processing plant, but so it is what it is. But it's actually still a nice path. And anyway, the idea for 20 plus years has been, well, if we could just connect these two, you would have a 11 some mile path. People could ride a bike from downtown San Luis Obispo to Avila Beach. How fun would that be? I mean, your kids could say, "Hey, we want to ride our bikes to the beach today," and you could say, "Sure." Because they got it's not a 55-mile-an-hour frontage road that you're riding on. It's a protected bike path. It would be empowering. It would be embraced. People from Europe would fly here for no other reason but to ride that path, right? How do you not see that this is obviously a boon, but yet it has had setback after setback after setback? They just cannot get this project going. They've finally addressed all these 11th hour problems. Most of the path is going through existing easements, but yet they've had horrible problems with it. Now they have the plan, they have the state matching funds, but they're a little short on money, dooming the entire project, dooming the state matching funds. Um, and I think they're only short like $1 million. I mean, to say that you're short that little amount of money um, just shows that you don't know how a bond works. I mean, float a bond and pay for the project. You'll pay the bond off in a year. Um, one more time for the kids in back. Bicycle paths pay for themselves. Name an infrastructure improvement that pays for itself. There's vanishingly few. Bicycle paths pay for themselves and quickly. Look at that, less than a year. It's insane the amount of tourism and other economic development it brings. A locality that gets it is Palo Alto, California. So this is interesting. Palo Alto put their first bicycle boulevard in 1970. Their 2012 master plan was quite aggressive, showing a real grid of bike lanes, protected bike lanes, bike boulevards. This is their 2024 update, where they're honing it in on just those purple lines is where they want to put in these protected bike lanes here. And so this whole proposal is chock full of these studies and graphs and everything to make the case. Drum roll, please. Protected bike lanes prevent collisions. Wow, right? Who would have thought? We always put a curb before a pedestrian. Why is it so hard to wrap our brain around put a curb before the bike lane? It's still a pedestrian just on a bike. It absolutely should be 100% the norm, but yet we have to advocate for this. Was Caltrans forced to do studies and graphs to show why they should widen the highway? Of course not, because you can't. There's no benefit to widening the highway. But is there a benefit to a protected bike lane? Of course there is. But so they brought the receipts. They're going. This is going to happen. Kudos to them. If you have a project where you're trying to get approval and you're wondering, what do you do? If you need some statistics or graphs or anything like that, news articles, there's no better source than peopleforbikes.org. I grabbed, just something right off their main page where they're recounting the success of Salt Lake City. Back in 2014, Salt Lake City ripped out a bunch of parking downtown, and they put in these protected bike lanes. And overnight, bike ridership shot up like crazy. There was this hilarious anecdote where they were literally hadn't even removed the construction barriers and the cones yet after doing the final painting, and people were wanting to ride the protected bike lanes. It was immediately immensely popular. Immediately took cars off the road. They've even seen retail sales were up. So we've got all this evidence that protected bike lanes are positive. Now after the fact, 59% of the business owners are supportive of it. Although I have to admit, there's one really hilarious quote I saw for this in an article where they interviewed one of the business owners. Part of this changeover was they dropped the speed limit to 20 miles an hour. on these downtown blocks. And this one business owner said that he actually thinks that's why the retail sales are up, because the cars are going slower, so they have more time to decide to go to his shop. So, which it probably is true, but no, we're going to take this as a win for the protected bike lanes. But another thing that has been adding fuel to this fire is voucher programs, and these are only expanding more. Denver, for instance, has given out over 4,000 e-bike vouchers, ranging from $400 to $1,700. It depends on your income level and what style of e-bike you want. They went ahead and sent out a survey to all of them. They heard back from 25% of them, and they calculated they've replaced 3.4 car round trips per week per voucher. It's 100,000 vehicle miles each week, cars they've pulled off the roads for a fraction of the cost of anything else. It is by far the most expedient and cheapest way to get cars off the road. Anything else is going to take years and millions and millions. What, you want to put in light rail? You want to put in a protected bus lane and order a bunch of electric buses from China? And I mean, what are you going to do to get cars off the road? Atlanta has widened their freeways so much, there's no more room to widen them. And they have not solved the problem. But now they're doing e-bike vouchers and they're immediately pulling cars off the road. Washington State, Massachusetts, California, everyone is doing e-bike vouchers. And it's not because they're in the pocket of the e-bike lobby, as if that exists, an industry with razor thin profit margins. It's because it works. It's because they're out of ideas. Look for voucher programs to only accelerate more. It's only exploding this revolution even more. And so if you have more people riding bikes, you're going to have more people needing to park their bikes. Remember I said we're going to talk about New York City a little bit more? Here it is. Remember New York City? The city that's trying to tamp down on e-bike usage, trying to limit their speeds. They've completely taken over the food delivery market in New York. Whole streets like this are striving to look for where can we park these e-bikes and charge them, because the infrastructure has not caught up with this revolution. And even worse, like I said, that locality is fighting the revolution instead of embracing it. So let's talk about parking. I kept seeing all these references to the Cal Green bike parking standards, as if there's some sort of gold standard of bike parking. They really aren't. We all, as you know, it's the local jurisdictions are always more robust. But as an example, this was from theirs, which it blew me away. They advocated 5% as bike parking. So in their example, 150 parking spots in a parking lot, where 100 are earmarked for employees and 50 for the guests. You should have 5% of the guest parking as bike parking. And this is their photo of how to solve that. This is for a 150 spot parking lot. Are you kidding me? Apparently the employees don't exist. Meanwhile, in Germany, one space for every 10 employees. At least the employees exist in Germany. In France, new apartment buildings must have secure bicycle parking for half of the units. Netherlands, be still my beating heart, Netherlands, one space for every bedroom, one space for every 200 square meters of commercial real estate. That's a standard that is supporting and encouraging bicycle parking. Here's a thought. Why don't you make the bike parking actually artistic? This is a gorgeous project by Zeller and Moy in Mexico City. I love this so much. It's simple, it's artistic, it's effective, it's scalable easily. You need more room, you just continue it on another wall. It quite literally elevates your bike as if to show it off for everybody. Also, it's so patently, obviously inexpensive. What a simple, elegant way to handle bike parking. It's not just some token you hide in the corner. It's a feature point. So let's apply that same logic. Let's solve a typical bike parking problem. this is at the top of my mind. This is the grocery store just down the street from me. Um, there's a couple other shops in here, a few restaurants. There's a CVS and a bank. Um, where's the bike parking? Here's some handicap spots here, and there's a couple other here. So, if you're noodling in on your bike, yeah, where's the bike parking? Curious, anyone have an idea? If you said, there it is, right by the CVS, are you kidding me? Are you actually kidding me? There's no sign, there's no painting. They didn't even drop the curb here. They stuffed in some useless planters and a trash can just to make it more difficult to pull up an e-bike with a trailer. Oh, chef's kiss. Store your random junk here as if to say to everyone, this is totally useless, worthless space. One of these days I'm going to track down this landscape architect, but I guess I'm all but mocking them. But here's that center median here where I just for some reason thought that's where the bike parking would be. There's lots of room. It's right there. You've got the walkway over and the dropped curb because of the handicap parking. Everything about this screams that's where you should put it. So, I came up with this. It's not the end all be all, but this is something that I think would kind of solve the problem. You need something that's visible from across a parking lot. So I started with just the pictogram of a bike, and you make a full size bicycle version of that out of metal and put it 6 feet in the air. It's visible from afar. It's encouraging, I would like to think, of bike parking. I mean, it says to the world, if you're so awesome as to have a bike, you get to park here, which kind of is the goal, isn't it? Like, what's the goal of like fire regulations? It is the goal so that we can pay lip service to where we need to put a fire alarm and a fire hydrant and be done with it? Is that the goal? Or is the goal to reduce the incidence of injury or death due to fire? That's the goal, right? So with bicycle parking, what is the goal? The goal is to encourage bicycle use, is it not? That's the goal. So the parking should feel that way. So, we've come to the end here. We have some room for your time for your questions. I want to just end with this quick story. So feel free to chime in with some more questions here. We got a little time for that. What would you do for an e-bike? Just curious. How motivated are you? Um, you want an e-bike, you're researching it, you find the perfect e-bike that you just really want to have, but they don't ship them to the United States. What are you going to do? Would you, I don't know, would you board a flight to Canada where there's a bike shop that stocks Dutch e-bikes where you could specifically buy a Schindelhauer, the oldest bike company in the Netherlands, now making e-bikes, making fantastic, gorgeous e-bikes. Take the bike to the ferry station and noodle it down to Seattle, and then in Seattle, load it up on the Amtrak and take the train overnight through Oregon, through California, all so you could unload your brand new bike at the train station for that glory ride home on your brand new Schindelhauer. Well, I did. And, it's, I want everyone to have the same, exhilaration. I want everyone to find their dream e-bike. It's so much fun, riding the bike that you truly love. It's so empowering and freeing and exhilarating. And I would wish that on everybody. They're, compared to the car and everything else in your life, they're inexpensive. And I just want to be able to ride these bikes around a society. Society doesn't have to cater to bikes, but can it at least be supportive of them? That's literally all I ask. So that's what I have to say. So, hey, Jake, I don't suppose any questions popped in.
We have some thoughts from an anonymous attendee, and I'm not going to read them word for word, but essentially there's a lot of concern in the East Coast area, New Jersey, New York, from regulation perspective and legislation stuff, and all the concerns of how people are treating this amplified use of e-bikes and how it's really not the be all end all solution. And just as a global maybe agreement with this individual, 100%, right? This is not going to solve everything. And in fact, it's going to bring a whole slew of other issues. They mentioned there's a lot of serious fires from the lithium batteries, and being able to build bike or storage facilities for the batteries, which are hazardous, which are placed by residential neighborhoods. And, there are so many other things that obviously we're not talking about right now. And
Well, the thing we're not talking about the 40,000 people killed every year by cars. And we've so normalized that. We're losing the number of people who lost in Vietnam every single year to cars. And we've normalized that. And we're sitting here pointing at what, oh, there's a rampage of lithium ion battery fires? No, there's like two. Same period of time. How many people were killed by cars? Absolutely, cars are a wildly inefficient way to move people, to move services, especially in an urban environment. Bikes take up less space. It is by far more efficient way to move packages, deliveries, people. It is a looming invasion, or it's a revolution that is happening right now, whether or not you like it. You like reading your New York Post articles that glorify the occasional e-bike incident when 1,000 to 1 cars are injuring and killing more people, and they just don't put that in the post because we've normalized it. Um,
100%.
yeah,
But at the same time, the concerns of the lack of regulation that they're trying to pass just from a you it, there's a lot more responsibility that comes for e-bikes, right? Like we see all these kids on these electric little motorbikes and all this
exactly,
stuff, and you're like,
absolutely,
there
absolutely,
has to
yeah.
be regulation, there has to be helmet laws, there has to be some way of
A
them,
hundred percent, 100%.
so
Yeah, it's a delicate situation because they're not, you don't have that input of a Department of Motor Vehicles, making sure the bike is a valid model, and you don't, and making sure that the rider has a license and passed the most basic competency test. Agreed. But that also just speaks to why this revolution is happening is because of the lack of that, because it is so available to every segment of society. Anyone can just get a bike and ride it. You don't have to pass a stupid test and prove you know how to. And so because of that, it's happening. And so this is something that is happening. And
yeah,
and whether or not we approve of it, we have to account for that. We
yeah.
don't get to sign off and say, I don't like semi trucks because they hurt people, so I'm not going to build infrastructure for them. No, you have to build the infrastructure for the things that happen in our society.
Yeah, totally. I'll read this comment specifically from a New York perspective. Uh, the food delivery guys are the worst. They weave in and out of traffic, ignore pedestrians, right on the sidewalk. Like
Oh yeah, well,
just
let me reframe that one. New York City, one of the wealthiest areas in the planet, has neglected putting in protected bike lanes. There you go. That's what it is.
right. They're
Where's the
they're getting where they need
where's
to
the where
go.
yeah, they're getting where they need to go because they don't have a road. If we catered to bicycles only, what would cars do? They would weave in and out of the bike lanes,
Which they do right now.
which they
I've seen
do.
videos.
Uh-huh.
But if it was
No, exactly.
protected and it was dedicated and if it was the structure, like, and I think
Exactly.
that's sort of the point of this whole
Exactly. Yeah,
webinar
I,
is
I, I think I think yeah, 'cause I think fundamentally what we're looking at is we literally need to normalize a new classification of road. You need a 5 foot wide curbed road that has a speed limit of 15 or 20 miles an hour. and you can have that pulls right into your school drop-off lanes, that pulls right into a nice parking area at grocery store and so on. But we need to basically formalize this expanded lane, and we really need that, yes, at a federal level even, unfortunately, but we know how long they're going to take to do that. But yeah, that fundamentally, that is just simply what's needed, is this appreciation that yes, you have this lane which is reserved for buses, this lane which is reserved for cars, and this lane which is reserved for bikes. It's really kind of that simple, and looking at a transportation system in a community is appreciating that there are multiple methods of transportation, and we have to support all of them. We cannot just cater to cars anymore.
Yeah. And I think what was the phrasing? You can't cure stupid. We're gonna get people who use this kind of thing for bad, right? The
Hmm.
theft of riding really quickly and snatching purses or people's phones. I've seen these videos of them just whizzing away and being able to get away and stuff. Yeah, it brings a whole new list of stuff, and we got to figure out. You can't you can't solve everybody's problems, um, but I
Oh, of
think
course. No, of course. Yeah, it's a challenge. And so, I mean, but so, yes, and yes, it needs regulation. But I mean, like I said, New York State passed class one, two, and three bikes. That's the law. That's what has been created in the state. To now, after the fact, go, oh no, oopsie, we meant 15 miles an hour. It's like it takes time for manufacturers to adjust. You have to work with the manufacturers, thinking forward of what you want out of these things. But can we please just not lose sight? What is the actual problem we're trying to solve here? If you're concerned about people dying, then how about we put a dent in the 40,000 people a year killed by cars?
yeah. Um, I think that's really it. Um,
Well, I do hope everyone finds their dream e-bike. I hope the best. But like I said, it's an exciting time, and there are some really cool challenges ahead of us and some really cool opportunities ahead of us. So, you know, I guess that being said, I wish everybody a fantastic weekend. Uh, Hope you get out and ride a bike this weekend.
all right, thanks,
We'll catch you
guys.
next time.